Hello, and welcome to Healthy Longevity. I'm Dr. Florence Comite, founder of the Comite Center for Precision Medicine and Healthy Longevity in New York, Palo Alto, and Miami Beach. For today's show, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to shake things up a bit and turn the tables around. My friend and colleague in longevity medicine, Dr. Deepti Agarwal, has asked if she could interview me about all things precision medicine and healthy longevity.
I'm excited to be here, Florence, and I have a list of burning questions for you.
Great. Well, I'm excited too because we're wrapping up another year. The field has exploded, or some might think imploded. And I think that we have a lot to share because it's really unknown. These fields don't even exist as proper fields in medicine, but I think they are coming together to do so. But I'm certainly flattered and delighted to welcome you to the show. So thank you for thinking of this and then implementing it. Let me tell our viewers a little bit about you. Deepti Agarwal is a triple board certified anesthesiologist, pain medicine physician, and integrative medicine as well. She's director of precision medical care at the Chicago office. Deepti graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and SUNY Stony Brook School of Medicine. Quite impressive there. And completed her medical training at Northwestern Memorial Hospital Feinberg School of Medicine and her fellowship between Cornell Medical and New York Presbyterian Hospital and the Osher Institute for Integrative Medicine. And what I love about Deepti is that she's a physician with an insatiable curiosity about medical innovation. Her mission, like mine, is to help patients achieve optimal health, prevent and reverse the diseases of aging, and so they can live long and vibrant lives. I actually find myself looking for like-minded physicians with insatiable curiosity and a deep desire to keep learning through their career. So we're like-minded colleagues who obviously resonate with each other. So I feel lucky. I'm very happy to welcome you again to the podcast, and take it away, Deepti.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Florence, for having me and allowing me to interview you. We've known each other probably a little bit better in the past year when our communities have collided and we actually have forums where we get to meet and kind of form our tribe of physicians who are like-minded. And I probably have known about you since I found your book, Keep It Up, a few years ago, and it's on our beautiful bookshelf over here where we keep all of our favorite integrative and precision medicine colleague physicians' books around. And my colleague and partner who actually founded the practice, Dr. Katherine Johnson, has really looked at you as a mentor and part of the inspiration for our practice here in Chicago. And I've always really enjoyed our conversations and I learned so much. And I want you to know that you are really a one-of-a-kind endocrinologist. And so just to recap for our audience is that you are traditionally trained at the Yale School of Medicine. You were also a clinical researcher at the NIH. You actually founded the first clinic specializing in women's health at Yale, and you really have been an early innovator in precision medicine for, about 30 years. So you were doing this at a time where we didn't even recognize that we didn't have research. Women weren't involved in clinical trials at that time. So you've been practicing this for a really long time. And on top of that, and what I find so fascinating is that you are an identical twin with all the genetic insights that brings. So I have to tell you that in our practice, we look to you as a mentor, and I think your legacy extends far beyond what you probably even know. And so I'm really thrilled for the opportunity to ask you questions about your journey and your take on proactive, healthy longevity medicine. And so for starters, I want to ask you what inspired you to become a doctor, but when you've been practicing as long as you have, and I know I find this question kind of annoying, I just want to jump into how your work as an endocrinologist really shaped your interest in precision medicine.
That's a great question. As an endocrinologist, we look to the whole body as a system because really while the glands live separately in the body, we're all connected. So it's not like the gland, whether it's the pancreas or the pituitary or the ovaries or the testes, are secreting just what they need locally. They're affecting your entire body. So when you look, for example, at testosterone, it affects your memory, your mood, your bones, your muscles, your heart. The same thing is true if you look at a supplement like any supplement that can affect the heart can affect the brain, like B vitamins. So I was always interested in integrating, and what I thought of is understanding the bits and bytes of each human being to put together a story. We are trained in asking patients about their chief complaint and why they showed up in our office. And the truth be told, I always found it very limiting, and I needed to know the whole human being in order to think about what would matter as far as the life she lived, what her family history was like, how we can make a difference in changing her trajectory in terms of her future health, while learning about what was going on with her thyroid or why she thought her sugar was too high and why she was gaining weight. So all of those became difficult and challenging because that's not the way medicine was set up. So that was a huge influence that for me, that led me to say, I need to organize this. I need to collect this data, integrate it, intervene, and come up with a path that can change the future course of anyone's health trajectory and keep them healthy for life. Does that make sense?
I love that. I mean, that's really a lot of what integrative medicine is, right? It's just an ability to have a therapeutic opportunity, and you can't have that therapeutic opportunity just based on a chief complaint. So I love that approach. And how do you think being a twin influenced your perspective?
That's also great. It's one of the three epiphanies that I rest on. So the first one was I was studying women and men, and I actually started in children. So I'm trained globally in endocrine, somewhat of an overachiever, just like you. Reading your, background is impressive. And I was interested in why I would see biomarkers or what we call lab results and say, to somebody at 25, 30, 35, my God, I see that you're at high risk, because I would know their family history, I know the life they're living, and I would see that their mother died of a massive heart attack in her 60s, father has osteoporosis and had angioplasty and bypass, and they were already following those tracks. It was evident in their blood work, even if they felt okay. And so that was step number one. Step number two was understanding that our bodies really change in our 30s. Our hormones keep evolving, and we lose some of the hormones that we're used to making, or they come out in a different way. So like in women in our 30s, we begin to put some weight around the middle. We lose testosterone 1 to 3% a year. By the time we hit 40, a lot of women, even those women who always stayed in great shape and they did everything right, they were putting on 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds, and they were miserable about it because their clothes didn't fit. And so it bewildered me as well, along with that infertility, heart disease, osteoporosis, all of that started emerging in the 30s in men and women to a different degree. And finally, being a twin, I innately knew that genetics wasn't the whole picture, because my twin and I, while identical, and we know that for sure, both from testing in medical school, she was in medical school as well, we have the identical gene makeup, but we don't express it the same way. So there are aspects of us that are different. So I was thinking about epigenetics over 25 years ago. If we're different, how could I learn about people so that I could apply what's effective for each one of us? I speak to the fact that my sister had gallbladder issues and needed to have her gallbladder out when she was under a lot of stress, taking care of my mom the last decade. And in my case, my gallbladder looks fine, and my GI tract will act up. Under stress, and for a variety of reasons, I will bleed, or I will have something called ischemic colitis, which I have to be careful. I have to drink a lot of water and take a full aspirin a day to reduce inflammatory markers. So that set the stage for me to designing a going forward protocol to evaluate people as what I think of as an N of one, meaning that we're all unique, each one of us. What do we do to set you on the right path to be entitled to healthy, long life? That's really the way I think about it.
I love that. So I actually really want to ask you to define for our listeners. We hear the word integrative medicine, functional medicine, longevity medicine. What is precision medicine? You touched on it a little bit, but I like to tell people I kind of think of it as a spectrum between, functional, integrative, precision, longevity, but how would you define it?
It's not a bad way to think about it. So through my career, as I integrated various practices, including Qigong or Reiki, which I learned about, or acupuncture, and I realized that we were looking at a system. And it was a scary question to me years ago, because inevitably somebody would say to me, well, aren't you a functional medicine doctor? And I'd be, no, I'm not really trained. And when I spoke and taught at A4M, that was a big message that I had to release, that I wasn't really attempting to take over functional medicine. It was more about data. To me, precision means data. It's not just personalized, because if you're a good physician, I feel like every physician, I'm going to personally take care of every human being. And you don't automatically do the same for every person. But for me, it meant collecting the data at a deeper level, because change happens at the cellular surface first. So symptoms don't necessarily emerge as we become diabetic, or we begin to see the lipid impact on our heart and arteriosclerosis and blockages, or dementia begins to evolve. This is happening over decades. And so I felt that if we could get the data and not wait and be reactive like in conventional medicine, but rather proactive, we would be able to then say, this is what's going on under the surface. So that also helped me be, as an identical twin, I knew the data was critical, as well as how your life emerged, how your genes emerged, the kind of choices you made. So precision to me really means data. In a formal way, I think in medicine today, precision emanated from genetic data. Like if you could identify the prostate cancer gene that then evolved as it metastasized, the same thing for breast cancer or any cancer, you can target what was most effective. Whereas just saying it's prostate cancer or lung cancer or breast cancer is a global understanding of something that doesn't give us the tools to treat and cure. And that's really the field, formal field in medicine today of precision medicine. But I think it's grown to encompass all of what we learn about the phenotype, how a person looks and acts, and the genotype, and in between the epigenetic aspect of it. I know that was a rather long answer.
No, but that's perfect, because I think, as you mentioned, when people think of precision medicine, they think of the oncology space and, stemming from genetics. But the more we hear about it, we often hear integrative and precision medicine together. I think it's helpful for someone who is a really, an early innovator in this space to hear the definition from you. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you, and it's always so nice, as you mentioned, to just have the personalized touch, right? And even keeping up those relationships and getting to know you on a deeper level, and what your purpose was, and why you wanted to do this medicine. So I think it's all great, and I think it's really helpful that we're defining it and getting more granular. So on that note, you mentioned a few things, but what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when starting out in this field? Because I always feel like I'm trailblazing a little bit, but you've been doing this for so long that you definitely face challenges.
Hopefully you won't get yelled at as much as me, or laughed at. So first at Yale, they laughed at me. It's like, what are you talking about, N of 1? And you have to do big studies. And because I was a researcher, one of the easier things for me is that I had credibility. I had published, I had brought drugs to market, I worked in children, women, and then men. I had all the right credentials to say, I don't think this is working. And that's why I began to morph and evolve. I think the biggest challenges was the disbelief. Even today, when you talk to an internist or a doctor, but certainly I've been on the phone with individual doctors for my patients, and they will basically completely disagree. Or even recently, a patient told me he reduced his dose of testosterone because the doctor said it was dangerous. And I said, no, what's more dangerous is now you're not in the sweet spot, and you've been in the sweet spot for a long time. So he changed, obviously, because I said, I'm willing to talk to your doctor. So those conversations were really hard, because I was doing so much work way ahead of what people were. And in medicine, you're really accused of going fishing for information and not really just dealing with the acute problem. But to me, the acute problem in a disease was late. Why don't we figure out where you're going? In fact, I have a more poignant study about my mom. My mom started having issues. So I set up a complete analysis. I had to go to different tests diagnostically. I made sure I knew what was going on. I went to some of the tests with her. And when things got to a point where I needed legitimization, I took her to the doctors. Each time I took her to a doctor, they would ask for those tests, and I would say, here they are, and they would get upset with me because they would think I was exceeding my abilities. And I would say, well, as an insider, I knew what to ask for and how to ask for it. And I wanted to prevent my mother from having to jump around to different doctors in different silos and not know what's going on and then try to get those doctors on a phone call together. It just wasn't going to happen. You know that. Right. And so I feel like patients suffer. So the biggest challenge is getting everyone together on the same page. The first woman I saw in Women's Health was telling me about her fear of breast cancer, and she had been to 5 different doctors of different stripes and colors, from an internist, an OBGYN, a surgeon, and they all told her different things about hormones, and she didn't know who to believe. So I think that the frustration in medicine is how we're expressing it to our patients and what they have to take away to understand what to do.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that question because I actually think it's helpful for patients to hear that are trying to navigate the system, because it can be complicated and they can get lost in the mess. And also it's helpful for physicians who think outside the box to hear this, because there are challenges and not everyone agrees on things. And I think thankfully in the time that I'm practicing, people are coming in with a little bit more agency over their health. When you were practicing, I think the dogma was a little different in how, allopathic medicine was viewed. And COVID also changed the way we think about things. So keep pioneering for us. So I want to ask a little bit more about the practice itself. Let's talk a little bit more about how hormones and metabolic health are central to your practice. And you've touched a little bit on this actually prior, but what are some of the misconceptions that patients and even other physicians have about these areas? Like anything else you can think of? I know you just told us the testosterone story, but anything else?
Yeah, I think it's complicated for folks. Physicians are trained to stay in their lane, and they worry because they feel like, above all, do no harm. We're all trained in that. And really, it's top down. So in the olden days, it would be the doctor gave you a prescription, you walked out the door. There was no need for not much education. There wasn't, a way for a patient to learn what she or he needed to know. And even if she learned it, like 20 years ago on the internet, it was quite confusing. And we all know, 2 doctors in a room, I believe there's more than 3 medical opinions. I believe it's like 10. And that emanates from how complex each human being is. So sorting out what is the risk benefit for each person is what I do in a patient encounter. It isn't always the same. And just as I pointed out for my twin sister and I. And so by understanding those misconceptions and drilling down into what is vital for each person is the way I believe we should all put research to work. So we get the research. Yes, we need good trials. We need trials in thousands of people, but the end result of it shouldn't be one size fits all. So I'm sure you've had patients come in and say things to you like, and they might even be a patient who's, a big guy with a lot of muscles, and say, listen, a very little bit goes a long way. And in the prior years, it would be, but you're a big guy and we did medicine because of your body weight, right? And somebody who's tiny, and I like to use Shaq O'Neal and Donica Patrick, saying the same thing. Donica might need a huge dose of, let's say, a blood thinner like Coumadin because she burns it faster due to her genetic makeup and epigenetic expression. Shaq O'Neal is a big, huge guy. He might need a tiny little bit. So it put into perspective for me that those misconceptions are rampant at the level of physicians and patients because we're looking at evidence-based medicine in thousands of people, but we can't extrapolate it down to that singular human being sitting in front of you. And so to me, that was the challenge, capturing like all this knowledge, going from how a person lives life to what their epigenetics and genetics are and the choices they make as far as sleep, food, exercise, which should come all together around that unique human being. So if you're sitting in front of someone whose main staple of their diet is rice, but rice causes their sugar to skyrocket, instead of telling them to cut rice out of their diet or to go on a paleo or a certain diet, my goal would be to work through how they could actually adjust what they were doing and do it in a sane way. So it's moderation, not deprivation.
I agree. And so we all have to stick together and keep working for our patients. As someone who integrates, you integrate genomics, epigenetics, some advanced diagnostics, what do you think is the most underutilized tool in sort of our preventative space, I guess is a good way to put it today?
So first of all, I don't love the word preventative. I know it's meaningful, but I like proactive, because if we're preventing, to me, and maybe this is the era I grew up in, it's stop smoking, you're going to get a heart attack or you might get lung cancer. Proactive means searching actively for what is changing beneath the surface. You can see it in little children. You can see it in newborns. I see it all the time. We have families where the little kids, one child is a little different and has an epigenetic pattern that shows metabolically their expression is metabolic syndrome. And therefore they weigh over 200 pounds, even though they live the same life as their sibs and they're not cheating. They have an insatiable craving for carbs. I've seen so many of this, and I started treating people when I grew the center and had the space because I felt so bad for girls and boys who grew up and had no tools to deal with it. So I would talk to them about different ways of handling it and be very aggressive about turning things around, because it just gets worse as you get older. So they then start ahead of it, right? But I think the most effective tool, and you might laugh, is family history. Because when I started, I thought of family history as a poor man's genetic test. You want to find out everything. You know how we're taught in medical school. Find out what the parents are about. Find out what the sibs, the grandparents, go as far back as you want. Who really does that in today's world when it's urgent care or you get 8 minutes in front of your doctor? And I even learned that lesson for myself. I had one of the best OBGYNs in the country. And when I went to see her year after year, I never even updated her on my family history. That osteoporosis was clearly evident in my father, and he broke a hip, and my mother had it, but to a lesser degree, because the questions weren't asked and it was presumed that you were known, right? And so family history to me became richer than a genetic test, because you don't know what genes are actually going to express. And I have great examples of that. I have patients, even one is a doctor, who had a diagnosis genetically from Illumina, because I did genetic testing going back to 2016. I had to understand your genome with Illumina, where we tested 250 people in one swell swoop. So those kinds of findings and observations have changed the nature of how I look at a human being. I need to know you. I need your health story in order to make a difference in your life path.
Right. And that's an important point that I would like the listeners to understand, is that genes can inform what's happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's your destiny. There's other things that you can do in the middle. And I don't think everyone understands that yet. And that's why having an understanding of precision medicine is really important.
Actually, I think you raised, just to add something to that, you raise an important point, and we should flip it. A lot of folks will find out there's diabetes in their family, or heart disease, or stroke, or dementia, and they'll automatically assume it's inevitable that they'll get those diseases. But what we now know, and I certainly know from my proactive research protocols and how I look at individuals, that the way I think of genes don't have to be your destiny is that by being actively aware and implementing approaches, you can change the way your genes turn on and off and the diseases you might get. So if you do get diabetes or a heart attack, maybe it's at 130 and not at 70 or 60. And so that's where genes don't have to be your destiny comes into play for me. It's not inevitable.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point, because I have so many colleagues and friends who are all physicians who still talk like that. Oh, well, my parents had, diabetes, so I'm just going to get diabetes in a few years. And I want to emphasize, it does not have to be that way when we take a proactive approach. So on that note, family history being an underutilized tool, is there a therapeutic or diagnostic that you incorporated over these last many years in your practice that you thought was disappointing, regrettable, something that wasn't as useful?
That's an interesting question. I think the answer to that is no, because I curate for whatever I want to do. And then before I implement, I test and I set up pilot evaluations, real-time research, because I designed what I did so I could collect that data. And then as each human being went forward in any kind of intervention, they were measured at certain precise points. So I could see if I had two men that I was treating, by 2 months, I knew how they would differentiate, or I would know what test to use. I think the most disappointing test that I think was out there in general, but I was never a huge advocate because I started with it in the 90s when it was first created and found in St. Francis Hospital, is the CAT scan of the whole body. I think the CAT scan of the whole body, which purported to show bone density, the colon, the heart, the lungs, what I drilled it down to pretty quickly,
We often talk about the lifestyle pillars, the exercise, the diet, the stress resilience, sleep. And I've heard you emphasize more than once that sleep is the most important. Talk to us about that, because I think people find that interesting.
When I started this work 20 to 30 years ago, I thought it was in the order of exercise, food, sleep, because I thought exercise and nutrition could trump what you're doing. And to some degree, as a 20-year-old where you can burn the candle at both ends, you can get away with it. It isn't doing your body good, let me be clear. You can go skiing in Aspen and, be up all night playing cards and drinking and then hit the slopes early in the morning, maybe get a couple hours. But in the end, it's going to add up and it will undermine your health. So over the years, I saw that repeatedly. And part of the issue has to do with epigenetics and genetic driven. When you have jet lag, for example, it really disturbs a person's physiology. That we knew. There's studies from Wisconsin and Harvard that speak to move the clock ahead or move it back, and people get diabetes and sugar disorders because their body doesn't turn on and off in the way it should. It's not just lack of sleep. It's the fact that our body needs restorative time, and it has a certain background humming mechanism that's always working, and we need to grant it that time to heal, to restore, to get better. I have a personal story for myself in that when I first tried plasmapheresis or TPE, this was in 2021, the last half of the year. I had signed up. I decided to do 6 months, once a month. And the first 3 months, my biological age reversed by 15 years. And I was delighted. I didn't know this data until later. I knew what it felt like, though, because for the next 3 months, I was working on creating my virtual app, Grok Health, which was to deliver and democratize what I do to everybody through a virtual platform. And when that happened, I was an active participant with the engineers. And I was up every night because that was the only time I could work on it. And we were working with people around the globe. And I had to give them answers very quickly. So I got 4 or fewer hours of sleep. And not only did I lose the gains I had, despite plasmapheresis, it boomeranged and my age went even higher biologically. I was able to see the effect of sleep, and I wear an Oura ring, which I love. And so I knew from monitoring my own health, starting back in 2012 when I broke my shoulder skiing in Trois Valley in France, and I couldn't sleep because I was always a great sleeper. So that's lucky. If you are a good sleeper, thank your family, because usually you inherit that, parts of it. And I realized the patterns are there, and if you can change those patterns to some degree, you're going to give yourself much longer life with vitality and health. So sleep became number one, food number two. And frankly, I think of sleep as the new exercise. It's my excuse for sleeping in when I don't feel like exercising. But there's no doubt, because we have so many people who are hung up on I have to get in the exercise, that they will torture themselves and not get enough sleep when they travel and try to do that. And I'll tell them, you're not helping yourself. You can always do the exercise, but you can't always make up sleep if you don't have that kind of body type.
Yeah, see, that's important to hear. And now I have those words percolating in my head. I remember Elizabeth the Earth mentioned when she got back from one of our conferences that she missed her workout, and you mentioned sleep was more important. So I always remind myself in the morning, if I'm feeling a little extra sleepy, I'm like, you know what, maybe I just need to sleep. So
yeah, and you know what?
It's
something. You're welcome. And I know she felt so much better, but sometimes taking that and actually giving a patient a prescription, or giving those of our listeners out there and say, you have a prescription. I used to have pads to write about exercise and food because I never believed in dieting. And I thought a diet was a bad word because everybody was allergic to it. I mean, there was a study I was once involved in where we couldn't find women who just ate. They were always counting calories, which is another artificial implant, for us to think about how to burn energy and what that means. And so I would actually give them a prescription and say, no, you need more sleep. No, you shouldn't do what you're planning to do. Try to rework where you are so that you could plan at least 6 hours. And for some people, it's more. And then you have to dig in to find out the stages of sleep, because you can have people who sleep 9-10 hours. And if it's 9 or 10 minutes of deep sleep, you're not going to feel rested. So that is a deeper understanding, and we're going deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah. No, I think prescribing some of these basic things is what we've missed, in traditional medicine when you go into the hospital, like prescribing sleep, prescribing exercise in a different way, prescribing date night. A lot of those things are important. So you mentioned wearables and having an app, the Grok Health. So with this rapid rise of wearables, continuous health tracking, how do you see technology integrating into precision medicine coming up here in the near future?
To me, they're one and the same, to be completely transparent. So I started using, I think the game changer was continuous glucose monitoring. As an endocrinologist, I used it first. I had access to it. Companies that were startups asked me to be involved in different ways of monitoring your sugar. And I loved the data. In the beginning, a patient could be prescribed a continuous glucose monitor, but would have to bring in the little disc. I'm wearing one right now, so I can tell you when I'm under stress, when things go off the charts, or when I get an IV with vitamin C, where it goes sky high. In fact, no one had described that, and we knew it. So with a CGM, it's a game changer because when it became direct to consumer, which has become recently, but when it could be used by the consumer or by the end person, by our patients, by our clients, to look at what the life they lived and what happened with their sugar, we can actually go way beyond the hemoglobin A1C, because your hemoglobin A1C can be perfect. It could be under 5. But if you're going up and down and you're spiking and falling in a way that isn't good for your body and not keeping it in a pretty good zone most of the time, you're going to harm yourself, and it's going to lead to lots of diseases. In fact, I met a longevity doctor who will go unnamed this week, and she was telling me her story, a little bit about her family history and her story. And she was telling me how during her pregnancy, she needed 27 units of insulin for each pregnancy. And she was shocked because she looks amazing. So you can have a few extra pounds. You can be so thin, you can turn sideways and it's hard to see you. She was perfect. I mean, she did everything right. She was in shock when she got pregnant with her first child, and each succeeding child, same thing. Now, I haven't had to treat a woman, and in fact, I've helped women get pregnant because if their sugar's out of line and they're going through IVF, the OBGYN doesn't always know that that is what's not making, that's what's interfering with their ability to make great eggs. But because I did infertility and I brought GnRH analogs to precocious puberty, endometriosis, fibroids, it's a standard of care for IVF, where you turn off the system using a GnRH peptide, and it turns your system off, and then you can impose stimulation on it. So I had a lot of deeper knowledge about some of the work I had done that I could apply. So I think the CGM is a total game changer. Is it enough in isolation? No. I think we've seen companies come and go who have tried to help people with continuous glucose monitors, but they don't really capture all of the essence of what a person needs because they're not trained in medicine. So you can get a little ways, and you can certainly help yourself as a biohacker, but you need to have the broader domain of understanding what else is going on in your body and what is it affecting.
So what role will artificial intelligence play in shaping personalized healthcare and of one medicine, do you think? And how's that going to optimize outcomes? Yeah.
That's my favorite question right away, because I've been, from the beginning, Deepti, I wanted, what I observed, I felt like if I could prove it going forward, I could democratize it and scale it. So that's what I did. About 6 years ago, I started raising money to create a virtual platform that would give people answers when they needed it, or at any time, day and night, 24/7, where they can ask questions. We're developing and have been developing a startup called Grok Health, which, after studying the field of AI and machine learning and working in it and proving that my model actually had built-in machine learning, that the outcomes were 98% correlated with what the insights using machine learning and artificial intelligence, because I started clinically. If this, that, then this is where you go. If a reverse combination, you might do something opposite. And I had to pick 5 biomarkers. So we studied those, and it was incredible. The data is phenomenal, and it was studied by a researcher in the field who proved to me, because I don't know AI, that you can use what we've devised for 5 biomarkers to get unbelievable help at a basic level where all people should start, every single one of us. And it went on from there, but I learned over the last 2 or 3 years, because we had pilot studies and we've even had people pay for the app, and they've done great, every single one of them. We've been able to practice virtual medicine, which is not telemedicine to me. It's not health coaches. It's very costly. The clinical cost of delivering it is astronomical. You can't scale. So the point we're at now is natural language process where you don't even need engineers, you don't need coding. It actually derives out of the work I've done and the data we've collected and then the information behind the scenes. So we've been sharing all the content, the insights, the personalized and targeted interventions so that it could actually be used direct to consumers. But also I'm hoping to share it with my colleagues and it could be white labeled.
Yeah.
So it would give you the ability to scale without putting in a whole clinical team behind the scenes, which is very costly in medicine. And this way we could really give people help when they need it. They can get a prescription or they can buy Lingo or Stella over the counter now for their CGMs,
yeah.
and make a difference, right? And so we're on that path.
I will tell you, we are eagerly awaiting that app. So as soon as it's out, we will be your white label testers.
Absolutely.
So just a few more questions. Okay. What advice would you tell yourself if you 10 years ago, let's say a decade, because a lot's changed in medicine and personalized medicine and N-of-1 medicine. So what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Wow, that's a tough question. So if I'm completely transparent about it, it would be that I failed to really market and get out there and do a podcast right from the get-go. I saw it happening. I had the book out, the first book of its kind. I did it for men because there was a lot out for women, and I felt that would radically shake a lot of women's health doctors because I didn't agree with most of it. And from my own experience and work and research. But I feel like if I could have gotten into social media and marketing sooner, if I had the marketing dollars that, for example, Tony Robbins has and others, and maybe switched off the doctor medical healer gene, which is so huge in me, I probably would have been further ahead. But on the other hand, I wouldn't have missed the opportunity to prove the kind of outcomes that we've had and the people who are now in their 60s but look like they're in their 40s and could live life to the fullest, or detecting cancers that are hereditary like Czech or Lynch and stopping them in their tracks in families, in whole families. In that way, I'm not regretful, but I think if I could have figured out how to do more in less time, I might have been further ahead. Let me put it that way.
We need your digital twin so that we can have you in multiple spots. But there, with all your experience now, you can help really bridge the gap between complex medical topics, all your anecdotal experience, research data, and public understanding. So it definitely won't go to waste, and so many patients benefited from you as their physician.
That's very kind.
Do you have any advice for doctors actually interested in practicing precision medicine, any particular curriculum? I get this question a lot. Is there any attributes of a physician that you think are most important as you assess a colleague's potential to achieve a practice that's
I
like
think
yours?
it's the same. I think it's the same that we all would like to think we started medical school and why we went to medical school. Above all, really want to help compassionately. To boot, have insatiable curiosity as you evidence and I evidence. Be a lifelong learner. Be an open-minded skeptic. Even be able to put together and understand, for example, articles published in the New England Journal of Medicine, in JAMA, in Lancet, in any of them, but make up your own mind once you read that data and read it critically. Because if there's one thing I learned on my first rotation with Dr. Larry Cohn is don't believe everything you read. And that goes for evidence too. So I think that insatiable curiosity, open-minded skeptic, the ability to be a lifelong learner and understand things that are going to evolve, and maybe to cap it off, listen to your patients, get their story. That story will inform you beyond anything else you can test or draw or diagnose, and understand that each one of us is unique. So bring an open mindset to your patient, to the bedside.
That's perfect. And I feel like I wanted to ask you if there was a message you wanted to leave behind for future generations, but I think you capped it off very well there. I will give you a break from my questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for spending some time with us. And I think it's so important that we keep educating people on the importance of precision medicine.
I agree. Precision medicine to lead to health and longevity in a way where we can own our future lifespan, be it 90, 120, 150, which I think is reachable, but we need to have the data and we need to make sure we, above all, treat each patient with compassion and hope.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Deepti. It was more fun than I've had all year because I got to talk a little bit about the road, which I think many of us don't really think about what we've done, but we're looking forward to do the next thing and the next thing. And that's very meaningful. We should take a hold of what we've accomplished and not just think that, well, that wasn't a big deal, let's go on to the next. We need to feel good about what we've put out there in the world. I really enjoyed your thoughtful questions, and I would like to ask you a few. I'd like to ask you about your practice and your hope for longevity and precision. Turn the tables a little bit here for the future. What excites you about the road ahead, and do you have any of your own health resolutions for 2025?
Yeah, I have to say I'm increasingly excited about the future of medicine, and even just having this conversation today, right? It makes me excited how precision medicine is really transforming the way we approach overall health. And I just see that we're moving into this era where treatments and these proactive strategies can be tailored not just to populations, but actually the individual. And that's, we have access now based on genetics, blood biomarkers, lifestyle, even gut microbiome data is going to start becoming more and more sophisticated. And I feel like this is all going to open doors to have more effective interventions, earlier detection of conditions. And I think that's such a game changer for extending health span, and something that really, really excites me and really reminds me why I was attracted to medicine in the first place. And in terms of resolutions for 2025, I always love a good growth mindset. And so I'm always trying to really push myself with all my lifestyle pillars. And I think, every year you get a little bit better, and you quantify a little bit more of yourself, and then you do a little experimentation and you figure out what works for you. And one of the other things is working on protecting my peace and having more balance in my life, which I think we all understand, and just being able to live in the moment and enjoy some of the accomplishments that have happened this year, because a lot's changed in our field. The field is really nascent, but also really moving fast.
I also usually ask guests a question, so I'm going to ask you this one.
Sure.
What would be one change if a friend said to you, what would help me optimize my health significantly? How do I protect my future? Do you have one top advice you'd like to give out?
Yeah,
or insight?
I think so. Aside from the obvious, we always talk about, the stuff we talked about, food, diet, sleep, all the things. My big thing, and I think this comes from my background working in the chronic pain space, is, and I think it's important to hear from a physician, is stress resilience. And you had mentioned this at the beginning about you and your twin sister and how stress lands on you differently. And I love talking to people how we all manifest stress in a different way. Like someone loses their hair, someone gets irritable bowel issues, someone ends up with cardiac issues. So I just think building some sort of resilience practice is so important. And actually, I think that's a really big part of proactive health, because your younger self can't anticipate what life has to offer you. Right. And as stress resilience influences every aspect of your life, your relationships, how you show up at work, how you feel on a daily basis. And I think that's really important, because working in that chronic pain space, you just see how complicated and messy health or lack of health can be. And so I would just urge people to always think about that. And I don't think it's easy to build that into your life, which is why I think if you can think about it every year when you make New Year's resolutions, even a little bit will go a long way, and one day it will pay off.
I completely agree. It actually, the whole stress affects the way you age, period, how
Absolutely.
much cortisol. But that's fantastic advice. I love it. I need some of it because it's very hard for me to meditate. Yeah. And I want to. That's what I'm going to try to do for stress and resilience. I so much appreciate, what a way to end the kind of year and what we're trying to launch and tell people to absorb. I know I appreciate my viewers. And I'd love you to share where you can be found online or in bricks and mortar. I know you're based in Chicago.
Yeah, I'm not as active on social media either as I should be, but I have an Instagram account. It's my first and last name, MD, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a website that's also my name too, Precision Medical Care. People can look up our practice, so a few different spots.
Outstanding. So thanks again, and thanks to you for the audience that's tuning in and our listeners. I'm Dr. Florence Comite, wishing you optimal health and happiness and peace in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.